You know the feeling when you wake up and just know something is wrong? It's not a noise that alerts you. It is the silence, that heavy, thick silence that presses against your eardrums. That is exactly how I woke up on the morning of my 70th birthday. Before I tell you exactly how I did it, I just want to thank you for listening to an old woman's story. If you believe that gray hair is a crown of wisdom, not a sign of weakness, and that a mother's love shouldn't be treated like a retirement plan, I'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe and maybe tell me which city you're listening from. Your support tells me I'm not alone. I rolled over and looked at the digital clock on my nightstand. It was 7:15 a.m. The sun was already slicing through the blinds, casting stripes of dust motes dancing in the air. I lay there for a moment, listening. Usually, by this time, the house is vibrating with noise. My son, Lance, grinds his fancy coffee beans with a machine that sounds like a lawnmower. His wife, Julia, is usually blending some green smoothie or watching the news at full volume in the living room. But today, nothing. I sat up, expecting to smell bacon. Or, at least, coffee. It was a big day, after all. 70 years old. I am not one for big parties or flashy gifts, but I expected something. Happy birthday, Mom shouted from the hallway. The smell of pancakes, the sound of my grandson, Leo, asking where his shoes were, even though Leo is away at college now. I swung my legs out of bed. My knees popped, a reminder of the years, but I felt strong. I walked to the bathroom, washed my face, and looked in the mirror. I didn't see a senile old woman. I saw Eunice. I saw the woman who worked double shifts at the hospital for 30 years to pay off this house. I saw the woman who buried a husband and raised a son on her own. I looked fine. I put on my robe and walked out into the hallway. The floorboards creaked under my feet. I walked past Lance and Julia's bedroom door. It was wide open. The bed was unmade, sheets tangled in a heap. They were gone. I checked my phone. No text messages. No missed calls. Just a notification from my pharmacy that my blood pressure prescription was ready for refill. I made my way down the stairs, holding the banister, not because I needed to, but because I liked the feel of the wood. My husband, Frank, sanded and stained this banister the year we moved in. That was 40 years ago. This house is my history. Every scratch on the floor has a story. And for the last 3 years, it has been a hotel for my son and his wife. They moved in temporarily. They said Lance had lost his job in sales, and Julia wanted to save money while she started her interior design business. I said, yes, of course. That is what mothers do. We say yes. We open the door. We make the spare room comfortable. We pretend we don't mind the extra laundry or the higher electric bill. I walked into the kitchen. It was a disaster zone. There were dirty dishes piled in the sink. A half-eaten bagel sat on the counter, hardening in the air. A carton of milk was left out, sweating a ring of water onto my granite countertop. I sighed, grabbing a sponge to wipe it up. That is when I saw it. Sitting right there on the kitchen island, next to the fruit bowl, was a thick manila envelope. It wasn't sealed. It was just sitting there, slightly open, like someone had been reading it while they drank their coffee, and forgot to put it away. I froze. My heart gave a little skip. Maybe this was it. Maybe this was my birthday surprise. Maybe they had booked a trip for us. Or maybe Lance had finally gotten those life insurance policies sorted out that he kept talking about. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and walked over. I pulled the stack of papers out of the envelope. The first page wasn't a travel itinerary. It was a legal document on heavy, white paper. At the top, in bold, black letters, it read, Durable Power of Attorney. I frowned. I put my hand in my pocket and pulled out my reading glasses. I slid them onto my nose and leaned closer. Eunice Triana, being of sound mind, I skipped down a few paragraphs. The legal jargon was dense, but I worked in administration for decades. I know how to read a contract. My eyes scanned the lines until they hit the section labeled Powers Granted. It said that the agent, listed as Lance Triana, would have full and exclusive authority to manage my real estate, my bank accounts, my investments, and my healthcare decisions. I flipped the page. There was a clause highlighted in yellow. Someone had actually taken a highlighter to it. It read, "This power of attorney shall become effective immediately upon signature, irrespective of medical incapacitation, due to the principal's advanced age and cognitive decline." Cognitive decline? I felt a cold flush go down my neck. I stood up straighter. I do the crossword puzzle in the Sunday paper in ink. I manage my own stock portfolio. I remember every single one of my friends' birthdays. Cognitive decline? I flipped to the next document in the stack. Last will and testament. This was a draft. It wasn't signed yet, but it was drafted completely. I read the distribution of assets. I hereby revoke all prior wills. I give, devise, and bequeath my entire estate, real and personal, to my beloved son, Lance Triana. I flipped more pages. Where was the section for the St. Jude's Children's Hospital? I have donated to them every month for 20 years. I had left them $10,000 in my current will. Gone. Where was the section for Leo? I had set aside a specific trust for my grandson to help him finish law school. Gone. It was all for Lance. Everything. The house. The savings. The car. The jewelry. I looked at the date on the top of the documents. Today's date. My hands started to tremble, but I forced them to stop. I placed the papers down on the granite counter, right where I found them. I looked around my kitchen. The kitchen I renovated 5 years ago with my own money. I looked at the coffee maker Lance used this morning. I looked at the mess Julia left. It all started to click. The little comments over the last few months. Mom, are you sure you paid the electric bill? The lights flickered. I had paid it early. Mom, you left the stove on again. I hadn't. Julia had. Mom, you seem a little confused today. Maybe you should lie down. They were planting seeds. They were gaslighting me. They were building a narrative that I was losing my mind, so that when they presented these papers, it would seem like a necessary step to protect me. I looked at the sticky note attached to the back of the power of attorney. It was Julia's handwriting. It said, "Get her to sign after the cake. Make sure she has a few glasses of wine first. Tell her it's just the insurance renewal for the house." The air in the kitchen suddenly felt very cold. They weren't planning a party. They were planning a coup. Tonight. They were going to do this tonight. They were going to smile, sing happy birthday, give me a slice of cake, pour me some Chardonnay, and then slide these papers in front of me while I was distracted. They were going to tell me it was just paperwork for the house insurance, trusting that I wouldn't read the fine print because I trusted my son. If I signed that power of attorney, they could sell this house out from under me tomorrow. They could put me in a home. They could drain my bank accounts to pay off their credit cards. I walked over to the sink and gripped the edge of the counter. I stared out the window at my backyard. The hydrangeas were blooming. I planted those. I didn't cry. You reach a certain age where tears feel like a waste of energy. You don't cry when the people you love disappoint you. You just adjust your assessment of who they are. My son was a thief, and his wife was the getaway driver. I turned back to the papers. I needed proof. I pulled my smartphone out of my robe pocket. I snapped clear photos of every single page. I took a photo of the sticky note with Julia's handwriting. Then, carefully, I put the papers back exactly how I found them. I aligned the edges. I made sure the envelope flap was open just the way it had been. I went upstairs to my bedroom. I dressed in my best slacks and a crisp blouse. I put on my pearl earrings. I brushed my hair. The silence in the house didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt clear. It was the silence of a battlefield before the first shot is fired. I looked at myself in the mirror one last time. "Happy birthday, Eunice," I whispered to my reflection. Then I grabbed my car keys and walked out the door. I wasn't going to wait for them to come home. I had an appointment to make, and I had a house to sell. If they wanted to treat me like a child, I was going to teach them a lesson they would never forget. A lesson about who really owns this house. I backed my car out of the driveway, looking at the house one last time. It was a beautiful house. It was a shame Lance would never own it. I sat in my idling car at the end of the driveway. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles had turned white. The engine hummed, a steady vibration that usually calmed me, but today it felt like a countdown. I was ready to drive straight to Mr. Henderson's office. I was ready to sign the papers to burn this whole arrangement to the ground. But then my foot hovered over the brake. I stopped. Something wasn't adding up. I knew what they were doing, trying to steal my house and lock me away in a facility. That was clear from the papers on the counter, but I didn't understand why. Not really. Lance has a good job. Or so he told me. He works in medical device sales. He drives a BMW. Julia is always talking about her high-end clients for her design business. On the surface, they look successful. They look like they have money. So why risk everything to steal from his own mother? Why try to declare me incompetent? That is a nuclear option. You don't do that unless you are desperate. I shifted the car back into park. I turned off the ignition. I couldn't go to the lawyer yet. If I went in there just angry, I might make a mistake. I needed to be sure. I needed to know exactly who I was dealing with. I wasn't just dealing with a greedy son anymore. I was dealing with an enemy. And you never walk into battle without knowing your enemy's weakness. I got out of the car and walked back up the driveway. The house loomed over me. It used to look welcoming with its yellow siding and white shutters. Now, it looked like a trap. I let myself back in quietly. The house was still silent. I walked past the kitchen, ignoring the envelope that was still sitting there like a loaded gun. I went straight to the guest room down the hall. This used to be my sewing room. It was where I made Lance's Halloween costumes when he was a boy. It was where I hemmed his prom pants. When they moved in, they demanded it be turned into their home office. They put a lock on the door the first week. Client confidentiality, Mom, Julia had said with that sweet, fake smile of hers. We can't have you accidentally shuffling papers around. Accidentally shuffling papers. As if I were a toddler, I reached up to the door frame. I knew something they didn't. I knew that the lock on this door was older than they were, and if you jiggled the handle just right while lifting up, the latch would slip. I gripped the knob. Lift. Jiggle. Click. The door swung open. The room smelled like stale coffee and expensive perfume. It was cluttered. For people who claimed to be so organized with my life, they lived in chaos. Papers were stacked everywhere. I walked to the desk. It was a beautiful mahogany piece I had bought for Frank 20 years ago. Now, it was covered in unopened mail. I started flipping through the envelopes. Most of them were stamped with red letters. Past due, final notice, collection agency. I picked up a credit card statement addressed to Lance. I didn't hesitate. I ripped it open. I scanned the summary box. My breath hitched in my throat. Balance due, $42,000. Minimum payment, $1,200. $42,000 on one card. I looked at the charges. High-end restaurants. a trip to Cabo San Lucas that they told me was a business conference. Designer handbags. I open the next one. A bill for the BMW lease. 3 months behind. Repossession imminent. I opened a letter from a bank I didn't recognize. It was a rejection letter for a personal loan. Debt-to-income ratio too high. It said, I sat down in the leather chair. The leather was cold. They weren't just greedy. They were drowning. They were living a champagne life on a tap water budget. And the tap had run dry. They didn't want my house because they wanted to live in it. They wanted my house because it was the only thing left they could liquidate to save themselves. I looked at the power of attorney draft in my mind. It allowed them to sell real estate. If I signed that paper tonight, this house would be on the market by morning. They would take the equity, my $500,000 of equity, and dump me in the cheapest state-run nursing home they could find, a place where the hallways smell like urine, and the staff is too overworked to care if you have a glass of water. They would trade the last 20 years of my life for a few more years of leasing BMWs and pretending to be rich. I felt a physical pain in my chest. It wasn't a heart attack. It was the death of something else. It was the death of the excuse. For years, I had made excuses for Lance. He's just ambitious. He's just stressed. He means well. Mothers are programmed to protect their children. It is biological. We would jump in front of a train for them. But as I sat there, holding the proof of his financial ruin, that instinct shut off. It was like a light switch flipping in a dark room. He wasn't a child making a mistake. He was a predator. He was a sinking ship, and he was trying to drill a hole in my lifeboat to keep himself afloat. He didn't love me. You don't do this to someone you love. I was just an asset to him. I was a line item on a balance sheet that he needed to cash out. Suddenly, the sound of a mechanical hum broke the silence. The garage door. My stomach dropped. They were back. They must have just gone out for breakfast or a quick errand. I scrambled up from the chair. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but my mind was crystal clear. I quickly shoved the letters back into their envelopes. I placed them back in the stack, trying to replicate the messy order they were in. I smoothed out the credit card statement. I backed out of the room. I grabbed the door handle and pulled it shut, jiggling it until I heard the lock click back into place. I hurried down the hallway, my footsteps silent on the rug. I made it to the kitchen, just as the door from the garage opened. Lance walked in first, carrying 2 Starbucks cups. Julia was right behind him, tapping away on her phone. Ugh, the signal in this neighborhood is trash, Julia was saying. We really need to move closer to the city once we... She stopped when she saw me. I was standing by the coffee maker, holding my empty mug. I forced the muscles in my face to work. I pulled my lips up. I crinkled my eyes. I smiled. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. I smiled at the people who were planning to bury me alive. Good morning. I chirped. My voice sounded steady. I didn't hear you two leave. Did you go out for coffee? Lance looked at me, a flicker of surprise on his face. He was probably expecting me to be asleep, or maybe he was checking to see if I had found the papers on the counter. His eyes darted to the envelope on the island. It was exactly where I had left it. He relaxed. Yeah, Mom, Lance said, putting on his good son voice. Just wanted to grab a latte. Happy birthday, by the way. Big 7-0. Wow. He didn't come over to hug me. He just stood on the other side of the island, guarding the envelope. Thank you, sweetie, I said. 70. I can hardly believe it. I paused for effect. I feel ready for a change. Julia looked up from her phone, her eyes narrowing slightly. A change? What kind of change, Eunice? Oh, just a new perspective, I said lightly. Maybe I'll finally clean out the attic. Or take a trip. Julia smirked. It was a cruel little look. Well, let's not get ahead of ourselves. We have a big night planned. Dinner, cake. We have some things to discuss, too. Family business. I can't wait, I lied. I'm going to head up to shower before work, Lance said. He grabbed the manila envelope off the counter as casually as he could. I'll just get this out of your way. Sure, I said. He tucked the evidence of his betrayal under his arm and walked out of the kitchen. I watched him go. I realized then that I couldn't just say no tonight. If I said no to the power of attorney, they wouldn't stop. They would try something else. They would forge my signature. They would drag me to court for a competency hearing. They were desperate, and desperate people are dangerous. I couldn't just defend myself. I had to remove the target. As long as I owned this house, I was prey. I looked at the clock on the microwave. 8:15 a.m. I think I'm going to go for a drive, I told Julia. Get some fresh air. Don't go too far, she said, not even looking up. You know how you get turned around. I won't, I said. I know exactly where I'm going. I grabbed my keys. I walked out the door. This time, I didn't hesitate at the end of the driveway. I turned right, toward town, toward Mr. Henderson's office. They wanted my house. Fine. They could have the house. But they were going to learn a very painful lesson about real estate. You can't inherit what has already been sold. I pressed down on the gas. I had 15 hours to turn my liquid assets into a fortress they couldn't touch. And the clock was ticking. I didn't turn on the radio during the drive. I needed to think. The road to Mr. Henderson's office was familiar. I had driven it 100 times to update my will or notarized documents over the years. But today, the road felt different. It felt like an escape route. Mr. Henderson, Robert, has been my lawyer for 30 years. He handled my husband's estate when Frank passed. He helped me set up the college fund for my grandson. He was a good man, an old-school attorney who still wore three-piece suits and believed in looking you in the eye. But he was also cautious. He moved at the speed of the legal system, which is to say, glacial. I didn't have time for glacial. I had until dinner. I pulled into the parking lot of his small brick building. I checked my watch. 9 a.m. exactly. His office opened at 9. I was his first problem of the day. I walked past the receptionist, a young girl named Sarah who was just turning on her computer. Mrs. Triana, she asked, looking up in surprise. I don't have you down for an appointment until next month for your annual review. I have an emergency, Sarah, I said, not stopping. Is Robert in? Well, yes, but he's just pouring his coffee. I knocked once on his heavy oak door and pushed it open. Robert was standing by the window, holding a mug that said, World's Okayest Golfer. He turned around, startled. Eunice, he said, putting the mug down. Is everything all right? You look like you've seen a ghost. Not a ghost, Robert, I said, closing the door behind me and locking it. A thief. And he's sleeping in my guest room. I sat down in the leather chair opposite his desk. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I pulled out my phone and opened the gallery. I need you to look at these, I said, sliding the phone across his polished mahogany desk. Robert put on his reading glasses. He picked up the phone. He swiped through the first photo, then the second. I watched his face. At first, he looked confused. Then his eyebrows furrowed. By the time he got to the photo of Julia's handwritten sticky note, the one about getting me tipsy, his face had turned a deep shade of red. He set the phone down gently, as if it were an explosive device. He took a breath. This is a draft for a durable power of attorney and a new will. It's a takeover. I corrected him. They plan to have me sign it tonight. They think I'm losing my marbles, Robert. They are going to use my cognitive decline, which they fabricated, to take control of my assets immediately. Robert leaned back, taking off his glasses. He looked furious. Eunice, this is fraud. Conspiracy, even if they try to enforce this, we can fight them in court. We can get independent medical evaluations to prove your competency. We can file a restraining order. It will take time, but we will win. Time, I repeated. That's the problem. I don't want to fight them in court for 2 years while they live in my house and drain my bank accounts. I don't want the stress. I don't want the drama. I leaned forward. I want the asset gone. Robert blinked. Gone? What do you mean? I want to sell the house, I said. Today. Robert let out a short, nervous laugh. Eunice, it's your birthday, not April Fool's. You can't sell a house in a day. Even in a hot market, you need to list it, stage it, do showings. Then you accept an offer. Then comes the title search, the inspection, the appraisal, the mortgage underwriting. The fastest closing I've ever seen was 21 days, and that was a miracle. I don't need a miracle, Robert. I need a shark. I looked him dead in the eye. I don't want a retail buyer. I don't want a family looking for their forever home who needs a mortgage approval. I want an investor. You know the ones. The ones who put those ugly yellow signs on telephone poles. We buy houses for cash. The ones who send me postcards every week offering to buy my property as is done. Robert hesitated. Eunice, those are predatory investors. They are flippers. They will offer you 60, maybe 70% of the market value. Your house is worth $600,000 easily. They'll offer you $400,000. You'd be throwing away $200,000. I sat back. Robert, listen to me closely. If I don't sell this house, Lance is going to take it. If he takes it, he will sell it anyway, and I will get zero. I will be rotting in a state facility while he spends every dime. So the math isn't between 600,000 and 400,000. The math is between 400,000 and zero. The room went silent. The clock on the wall ticked loudly. I have enough in my retirement accounts to live comfortably. I continued. I don't need the maximum value. I need the maximum speed. I need safety. I need to know that when I walk into my house tonight, it isn't my house anymore. Robert rubbed his temples. He was starting to see the logic. He was a lawyer, after all. He understood risk mitigation. If we get it under contract, he murmured, thinking out loud, if we have a binding purchase and sale agreement signed and a deposit check in hand, then legally the equity is locked. Even if you sign that power of attorney tonight, which you won't, Lance couldn't sell the house to anyone else because it's already sold. He couldn't borrow against it because the title is encumbered. Exactly, I said. It cuts his legs out from under him. Robert looked at me with a newfound respect. You've really thought this through. I had a long drive. I said dryly, make the call, Robert. Find me a cash buyer who can sign by 5 p.m. Tell them I want a lease-back agreement for 30 days so I can move out at my own pace, but the ownership transfers immediately. Robert nodded. He picked up his desk phone. He started dialing. I listened as he called a contact of his, a real estate investment group he had dealt with before on foreclosure properties. Yes, that's right, Robert said into the phone. Prime location. 4 bedrooms, 3 baths. Immaculate condition. But the seller needs a same-day contract. Cash only. No contingencies. No inspections. He paused, listening to the person on the other end. Because, Robert said, looking at me, she wants to simplify her estate. Today. He listened again. He covered the mouthpiece. He's interested, Robert whispered to me. He's asking for a price. Tell him $450. I whispered back. That's a steal, and he knows it. Robert relayed the number. There was a pause. Then Robert nodded. Okay, 3 p.m. My office. Bring the check. He hung up the phone. He's biting. I asked. He thinks you're desperate, Robert said. He thinks you're in financial trouble, and he's getting the deal of the lifetime. He'll be here at 3, with a standard investor contract, and a cashier's check for the earnest money. I let out a breath. I didn't know I was holding. Good. Eunice, Robert said, his voice soft. Are you sure about this? This is your home. You raised your family there. I raised my family in a home, I said, standing up. What I have now is just a building where 2 people are plotting against me. It's just wood and drywall. Robert, my memories are in my head. My safety is in that contract. Okay, Robert said. I'll draft the paperwork on our end to make sure the leaseback clause is ironclad. We need to make sure they can't kick you out tonight. Oh, I'm not worried about them kicking me out, I said, walking to the door. I'm leaving tonight anyway, but I want the legal right to stay just to spite them. Where will you go? I'll get a hotel suite, somewhere with room service and a pool. Then I'm going to look at those condos in Sarasota you're always talking about. I put my hand on the doorknob. One more thing, Robert, I said. When the money comes through, when the sale closes next week, I want it diverted. Do not put it in my regular bank account. Lance might have access to the routing number or be able to see the balance. I'll open a trust account, Robert said. Client funds. He won't be able to touch a penny. We can set it up so you have a debit card and full access, but on paper, it's secure. Perfect, I said. I walked out of the office and back into the waiting room. Sarah smiled at me uncertainly. Have a nice day, Mrs. Triana, she said. Happy birthday. It's getting happier by the minute, Sarah, I said. I walked back to my car. The sun was higher in the sky now. It was a beautiful day, the kind of day where you should be having a picnic or playing with your grandkids. Instead, I was selling my life's work to a stranger to stop my son from robbing me. It was tragic, in a way, but as I sat in the driver's seat, I didn't feel sad. I felt powerful. For the last 3 years, I had felt like a guest in my own home. I walked on eggshells. I kept my opinions to myself. I let them dominate the space because I wanted to keep the peace. But peace at the price of dignity isn't peace. It's submission. I wasn't submitting anymore. I checked my phone. A text from Lance. Hey, Mom. Hope you're having a nice drive. Don't be late for dinner tonight. We have a big surprise. I stared at the screen. A big surprise. I typed back. Wouldn't miss it for the world. I put the phone down and started the engine. I had 5 hours to kill before the meeting with the investor. I decided to go to the bank. I needed to move my jewelry into a safety deposit box. I wasn't leaving anything behind for them to pawn. The 15-hour deadline was ticking, and for the first time in a long time, I was the one controlling the clock. After the bank, I didn't want to go home. I couldn't go home. If I walked back into that kitchen and saw the coffee cup Lance left in the sink, I might have smashed it against the wall, and I needed to stay calm. I needed to be the sweet, oblivious mother for just a few more hours. I drove to the park down by the river. It's a quiet spot with a few benches facing the water. I used to bring Lance here when he was a toddler to feed the ducks. I parked the car and walked to the bench we used to sit on. I sat down and wrapped my cardigan tighter around me. The wind coming off the water was brisk, but it felt good. It felt real. I had hours to kill before the 3 p.m. meeting with the investor. Hours to sit with my thoughts. And when you are 70 years old and sitting alone on a park bench on your birthday, your thoughts tend to travel backward. I looked at the water, and I didn't see the river. I saw the past. I saw a younger version of myself. I was 30 years old, standing in a department store, holding a pair of expensive leather sneakers for Lance. He was 10. He wanted them because all the other boys at his private school had them. They cost $80. That was a fortune back then. I looked down at my own feet in that memory. I was wearing boots with a hole in the sole. I had put a piece of cardboard inside, so my socks wouldn't get wet. I bought him the sneakers. I walked around with cardboard in my boots for another winter. Why did I do that? Because I wanted him to fit in. I wanted him to feel equal to those wealthy children. I thought that if I gave him the best, he would grow up to be the best. I was wrong. I wasn't raising a successful man. I was raising an entitled one. I taught him that his wants were more important than my needs. The memory shifted. I was 55. Frank had just passed away. I was still grieving, still trying to figure out how to pay the property taxes on a single income. Lance came to me with a business plan. He wanted to start a consulting firm. He needed $20,000 for startup capital. It's a loan, Mom, he had said, his eyes bright and urgent. I'll pay you back with interest in 6 months. I just need a leg up. I wrote the check. It was money from Frank's life insurance. It was blood money, essentially. 6 months later, the business folded. He didn't pay me back. But 2 weeks after he told me the business failed, he drove into my driveway in a brand new leased sports car. I need to project success to get my next job. He told me when I asked how he could afford it. He was projecting success with my retirement money. I forgave him. I always forgave him. I told myself that the economy was tough, that he was trying his best. Then came Julia. I remember the day she moved in 3 years ago. It was supposed to be for 3 months maximum. Lance had lost his job again, and they were being evicted from their luxury apartment because they hadn't paid rent in 4 months. We just need to get back on our feet, Mom, Lance said, just until summer. I opened my door. I moved my sewing machine out of the guest room. I bought new towels for the guest bath. I filled the fridge with the expensive organic food Julia liked. They moved in with a moving truck full of furniture they couldn't fit in the bedroom. They filled my garage with their boxes. My car had to sit in the driveway, exposed to the rain and sun, because their storage was more important than my vehicle. 3 months turned into 6. 6 turned into a year. And slowly, the dynamic changed. At first, they were grateful. They said, "Thank you," when I cooked dinner. They offered to help with the dishes. But by year 2, the gratitude evaporated. It was replaced by expectation. They stopped asking if they could have friends over. They just threw parties. They stopped asking if I minded them watching TV in the living room until 2 a.m. They just turned up the volume. I became a roommate in my own house. A roommate they didn't particularly like. I watched a leaf float down the river, bobbing in the current. Then I thought about the last 6 months. This was the part that made my stomach turn. I thought about the gaslighting. That's a word I learned from a talk show, but now I knew exactly what it meant. It started small. "Mom, you told us you'd pay for the groceries this week. Don't you remember?" Julia would say, looking at me with concern. I hadn't said that, but she said it with such conviction that I doubted myself. So I paid. Then it got worse. One afternoon, I came downstairs and the stove burner was on full blast. The flame was roaring. "Mom," Lance yelled, running into the kitchen. "Are you trying to burn the house down? You left the stove on." I was horrified. I swore I hadn't used the stove that day. I had made a sandwich for lunch, but there it was burning. "We need to be careful," Julia whispered to Lance, loud enough for me to hear. "She's getting dangerous." I spent weeks terrified that I was losing my mind. I started writing notes to myself. I started double-checking everything. Now, sitting on this park bench with the cold clarity of betrayal, I knew the truth. I hadn't left the stove on. Julia did. She turned it on, waited for me to come downstairs, and then staged the scene. It was a campaign, a carefully orchestrated campaign to document incidents. They were building a case. They weren't worried about my memory. They were banking on it failing so they could take control. They looked at my kindness, my silence, my willingness to help, and they didn't see love. They saw weakness. They saw a sheep ready to be sheared. I looked down at my hands. These hands changed diapers. These hands scrubbed floors. These hands wrote checks to keep Lance out of debt. I clenched them into fists. The sadness evaporated. It was replaced by something cold and hard. Steel. I realized then that the mother who sacrificed everything for her son died this morning. She died the moment I saw that power of attorney. The woman sitting on this bench wasn't a victim. She was a survivor. I checked my watch. It was 1:30 p.m. I had been sitting here for hours, mourning a relationship that didn't exist. I was mourning a son who was a fantasy. The real Lance was a man who would gaslight his own mother to pay off his credit cards. I stood up. My legs felt steady. I wasn't going to let them win. I wasn't going to let 40 years of hard work disappear because I was too polite to fight back. I walked back to my car. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. "You are not senile," I said out loud. "You are just finished." I started the engine. I had a meeting with a shark, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the shark. I was the one holding the bait. I drove toward Mr. Henderson's office. I was done looking back. The only thing that mattered now was the deadline. 5 p.m. I was going to sell the roof over their heads, and I wasn't going to lose a wink of sleep over it. I arrived back at Mr. Henderson's office at 2:50 p.m. I had spent the last hour driving around aimlessly just to keep away from the house. I parked my sedan next to a shiny black Range Rover that was taking up 2 spaces. I had a feeling I knew who that belonged to. I walked into the reception area. Sarah, the receptionist, looked up with wide eyes. "They're waiting for you in the conference room, Mrs. Triana," she whispered. "The guy, he looks intense." "Intense is good," I said. "Intense gets things done." I smoothed my skirt and walked into the conference room. Robert was sitting at the head of the long mahogany table. To his right sat a man who looked like he had just walked off a billboard for aggressive personal injury lawyers. He was younger than I expected, maybe 40, wearing a suit that was too tight and a watch that was too big. He didn't stand up when I walked in. He just tapped his pen on the table. "Mrs. Triana," Robert said, standing up. "This is Marcus Russo. He represents the investment group." "Mr. Russo," I said, taking a seat opposite him. I didn't smile. I wasn't there to make friends. "Let's cut to the chase, Eunice," Russo said. He had a voice like gravel. "Your lawyer says you need a same-day deal. Cash. No contingencies." That smells like desperation to me. Usually when I smell desperation, I offer 50 cents on the dollar. "I'm not desperate, Mr. Russo," I said calmly. "I'm motivated. There is a difference." "Right," he smirked. "Motivated. Look, I've pulled the comps. Your house is worth $620 on a good day if you stage it and wait 3 months. But you don't have 3 months. You have, what, 2 hours?" He checked his oversized watch. "I'll give you $400,000. Cash. We close in 7 days. I'll put down a non-refundable deposit today." Robert cleared his throat. "That is significantly below market value, Marcus. We were thinking 470. Russo laughed. It was a dry, barking sound. 470? For a rush job? No way. I have to verify the title. I have to take the risk that the plumbing isn't shot. 410. I watched them volley numbers back and forth. It was like watching a tennis match where the ball was my life savings. Every time the number went down, I lost a year of retirement vacations. I lost a new car. I lost security. But then I remembered the alternative. If I didn't sell, Lance took it all. Zero. 450,000. I interrupted. Russo looked at me. 425. 450, I said, leaning forward. And I have a condition. Russo raised an eyebrow. You're not really in a position to make demands, lady. I am, I said, because my house is in a prime school district, and the roof is only 2 years old. You know, you can flip it for $650 in a month. You're making $200,000 profit for doing nothing but signing a check. So, yes, I have a condition. Let's hear it, Russo said, leaning back. I want to sign a leaseback agreement regarding possession. I said. I had rehearsed the wording with Robert earlier. Technically, we close the sale in 7 days when the title work is done. But I want to sign a contract today that grants you, the buyer, equitable interest and immediate rights to the property effective at 5 p.m. today. And I want to sign a lease to rent the house back from you for 1 month. Russo looked confused. Why? You want to pay me rent? I want to be a tenant, I explained. And I want you, as the new landlord/owner, to have the explicit right to evict unauthorized occupants. Russo's eyes narrowed. He was smart. He put the pieces together. You have a squatter, he stated. I have a son, I corrected, who refuses to leave. If the house is sold to you, and I am just a tenant, he has no claim to the property. He can't claim it's a family asset if it belongs to an LLC. Russo grinned. It was a shark's grin. He liked it. He liked the nastiness of it. I love it, Russo said. I have a property management team that handles evictions. They're very persuasive. We can post a notice to vacate the second the deed records. Exactly, I said. So $450. You get the house, the profit, and the fun of kicking out a deadbeat. I get the check. Russo looked at Robert, then back at me. He tapped his pen again. Deal, he said. Robert exhaled loudly. He quickly pulled a stack of documents from his briefcase. I have the standard purchase and sale agreement here. I'll add the addendum for the immediate possession and lease back. The next 20 minutes were a blur of paper shuffling and scratching pens. I signed my name. Eunice Triana, over and over again. With every signature, I felt a weight lifting off my chest. People talk about their homes being their castles, but a castle is only good if you are the queen. If you are a prisoner in the dungeon, it's just a jail. I was signing away the jail. Okay, Robert said, stamping the final page with his notary seal. It is done. The house is under contract. You have legally encumbered the title. You cannot sell it to anyone else, nor can anyone else claim it. Russo reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a checkbook. He scribbled hastily and ripped out a check. $50,000, Russo said, sliding it across the table. Earnest money deposit. Non-refundable. The balance of $400,000 will be wired to your attorney's trust account at closing next week. I picked up the check. It felt heavy in my hand. $50,000. It was real. Pleasure doing business with you, Eunice, Russo said, standing up. I'll have my property manager swing by tomorrow to introduce himself to the unauthorized occupants. Please do, I said. I shook his hand. His grip was firm. He was a predator. Yes, but today he was my predator. I left the office with Robert. He walked me to the door. You know this is irreversible, right? Robert asked softly. Once you deposit this, you can't change your mind because you feel guilty. I won't feel guilty. I said, I feel safe. I walked out into the afternoon sun. It was 3:45 p.m. I drove straight to a bank 3 towns over. It was a credit union I had never used before. I walked in and asked to open a new checking account. Just a minimal deposit today, the teller asked. No, I said, handing her the check. I'd like to deposit $50,000. She blinked, then smiled professionally. Of course. Let me get the manager. 30 minutes later, I walked out with a temporary debit card and a receipt showing a balance of $50,000. Lance didn't know this bank existed. He couldn't access it. He couldn't touch it. I got back in my car and drove home. When I pulled into the driveway, it was 4:45 p.m. The house looked the same as it had this morning. The grass was still green. The shutters were still white, but it wasn't my house anymore. It belonged to Marcus Russo's LLC. I was just a visitor. I unlocked the front door. Silence again. They weren't home from work yet. I went into the kitchen. The envelope was still on the counter, right where Lance had left it. I stared at it for a moment, then pushed it aside. I opened the fridge. I took out a steak, some potatoes, and a bundle of asparagus. I was going to make dinner. My birthday dinner. I peeled the potatoes with sharp, rhythmic strokes. Scrape, scrape, scrape. With every peel, I stripped away another layer of my guilt. I chopped the asparagus. Chop, chop, chop. I seasoned the steak. I wasn't cooking for them. I was cooking for me. For the first time in years, I was doing exactly what I wanted in this kitchen. I set the table, not with the everyday plates, but with the good china, the ones with the gold rim that I was saving for a special occasion. This was a special occasion. This was Independence Day. I poured myself a glass of red wine. I took a sip. It tasted rich and oaky. I looked at the clock on the microwave. 5:30 p.m. The garage door rumbled. My pulse quickened, but not from fear. It was adrenaline, the kind you feel right before the curtain goes up on a play you've rehearsed for a lifetime. I took another sip of wine. I leaned against the counter, listening to the car doors slam. I heard their muffled voices arguing about something, probably money. They had no idea. They were walking into a trap, thinking they were the hunters. The door handle turned. Mom, we're home. Lance called out, his voice fake cheerful. In the kitchen, I called back. I put a smile on my face. A real smile. Because for the first time in 40 years, I wasn't just a mother. I was a woman who had just pulled off the deal of the century. Let the party begin. The clock on the wall ticked past 7 p.m. The roast was resting on the cutting board, the aroma of rosemary and garlic filling the kitchen. I had set the table with the linen napkins I usually saved for Christmas. I lit 2 tall white candles. I poured myself a glass of water. I needed to be clear-headed. They were going to try to get me drunk. That was step 1 of their plan, so I had to be careful. I would hold a wine glass. I would toast, but I wouldn't swallow a drop. The front door opened, and the energy in the house shifted instantly. It went from a sanctuary to a stage. Mom, we're here. Lance's voice boomed down the hallway. They walked into the kitchen. Lance was carrying a plastic bag from the local grocery store. Julia was right behind him, holding a bottle of wine that I knew cost less than $10. Wow, Lance said, stopping in his tracks when he saw the table. You cooked? I thought we'd order pizza. It's my 70th birthday, Lance, I said, smoothing the front of my blouse. I didn't want pizza. I wanted a proper meal. Of course, Eunice. Julia chimed in, stepping forward to give me a stiff air kiss near my cheek. She smelled like heavy perfume and anxiety. It looks lovely. We just brought a little dessert. She placed a white cardboard box on the counter. I could see the grocery store logo on the side. They hadn't gone to a bakery. They had grabbed a mass-produced cake from the clearance cooler on their way home. It was a small insult, but Tonight, everything felt like evidence. And wine, Lance said, popping the cork on the bottle with a little too much enthusiasm. To celebrate the big day, he grabbed 3 glasses from the cabinet, not the crystal ones I had set out, but the everyday tumblers. He poured a heavy amount into one and handed it to me. "Drink up, Mom," he said, grinning. "You deserve to relax tonight." I took the glass. "Thank you, sweetie." We sat down to eat. The conversation was painful. It was like walking through a minefield of small talk. Lance talked about his big deals at work, deals I knew didn't exist because I had seen his credit card statements. Julia complained about a client who was too demanding, which was ironic coming from a woman who lived in my house for free and demanded I change the thermostat settings 3 times a day. I cut my steak into small, precise pieces. I watched them. They were nervous. Lance kept tapping his foot under the table. Julia kept glancing at her purse, which she had placed on the floor right next to her chair. "So, Mom," Julia said, leaning forward, "how are you feeling?" "Really? I feel fine, Julia," I said. "Why?" "Oh, just, she lowered her voice to a sympathetic whisper. 70 is a big number, and we've noticed you've been a little forgetful lately. With the stove and the bills." There it was. The setup. "I haven't forgotten a bill in 40 years, I said, keeping my voice light. "Well, maybe not intentionally," Lance said quickly, "but things slip through the cracks. We just worry about you, Mom. We don't want you to have to stress about the administrative stuff anymore. You should be enjoying your golden years, not worrying about property taxes and insurance renewals." "That is very thoughtful of you," I said. Lance exchanged a quick look with Julia. They thought I was buying it. They thought the poor, confused old lady was grateful for their help. "Let's do cake," Lance announced suddenly. He stood up and cleared the plates, dumping my half-eaten steak into the trash without asking. Julia brought the box over to the table. She opened it to reveal a vanilla cake with neon blue frosting that said, "Happy B-Day," in sloppy script. She stuck a single candle in the middle and lit it. They sang, "Happy Birthday." Their voices were loud and hollow in the big kitchen. I smiled through it. I blew out the candle. "Make a wish, Mom," Lance said. "I wish you were the man I thought I raised. I thought." But out loud, I said nothing. "Okay, cake time later," Julia said, clapping her hands together. "But first, we have a little gift." Well, not a gift exactly, just something to give you peace of mind. She reached down into her purse. My heart started to hammer against my ribs. This was it. She pulled out the manila envelope, the same one I had seen this morning, the same one I had photographed in the lawyer's office. She slid it across the table, avoiding the gravy stain on the tablecloth. "What is this?" I asked, playing my part. "It's just some paperwork, Mom," Lance said, pulling his chair closer to mine. He put a hand on my shoulder. It felt heavy and hot. "Julia and I spent a lot of time organizing this for you. It's basically an updated insurance package for the house and a form that lets me talk to the bank for you, so I can handle the bills. That way, you don't have to worry about writing checks anymore." "It's a bundle," Julia added. "We need to get it notarized tomorrow, but we need your signature tonight to process the online filing." I looked at the envelope. I opened the flap and pulled out the papers. Top page, durable power of attorney. Bottom page, last will and testament. They hadn't even changed the order. "This looks like a lot of legal language for insurance," I said, adjusting the reading glasses I had pulled from my pocket. "Oh, lawyers," Lance laughed nervously. "They charge by the word. It's just standard boilerplate stuff. It basically just says, Lance can help Mom with the mail." That's it. He was lying to my face. He was looking me in the eye and lying to the woman who taught him how to tie his shoes. "And this one?" I asked, pointing to the will. "Just a beneficiary update for the life insurance. Julia lied smoothly, just to make sure everything is current. Lance uncapped a pen, a nice, heavy ballpoint pen. He held it out to me. Just sign right there, Mom, he said, pointing to the line marked principal. And there on the second page. Then we can eat this cake and watch that movie you like. I took the pen. The room went silent. The only sound was the refrigerator humming in the background. I looked at the paper. I looked at the line where I was supposed to sign away my freedom. I looked at the paragraph that declared me incapacitated. I held the pen over the paper. My hand hovered there. I could feel them holding their breath. They were so close. They could almost taste the money. They were probably mentally spending the equity already, paying off the BMW, booking a trip to Europe, putting me in a shared room at Shady Pines. I looked up. I looked straight at Lance. You really want to help me manage the house, Lance? I asked softly. Of course, Mom, he said, his eyes locked on the pen. I just want to take the burden off you. That is so interesting, I said, because I was thinking the same thing today. I was thinking that this house is just too much work. The maintenance, the taxes, the yard. Exactly, Julia said, leaning in. That's exactly why you should sign. Let Lance handle it. I set the pen down. I didn't sign. I took off my glasses and folded them slowly. But you can't manage the house, Lance, I said. His smile faltered. What? Why not? I'm your son. Because I interrupted, my voice dropping an octave. You can't manage something that isn't mine anymore. Lance froze. Julia blinked, her mouth slightly open. What are you talking about, Eunice? Julia asked, a sharp edge entering her voice. You're confused. I'm not confused, Julia, I said. I picked up my wine glass, swirled the liquid, and set it back down without drinking. I'm actually very clear. I reached into my pocket. I didn't pull out a tissue. I pulled out a folded document. It was the carbon copy of the purchase and sale agreement I had signed 3 hours ago. I unfolded it and laid it right on top of their fraudulent power of attorney. The bold letters at the top screamed, Residential Real Estate Purchase Agreement. I don't need help managing my assets, Lance, I said, looking him dead in the eye, because I don't have any assets to manage. I sold the house this afternoon. Lance looked at the paper. He looked at me. He looked back at the paper. What? He whispered. I sold it. I repeated, enunciating every word. To an investment group. For cash. The deal is done. The contract is binding. The earnest money is already in my bank account. A bank account you don't know about. You can't do that, Lance stammered. His face was losing color rapidly. You can't just sell the house. We live here. Not for long, I said. The new owner is very particular about unauthorized tenants. I believe the term he used was eviction. Julia stood up so fast her chair scraped loudly against the floor. You sold the house without asking us. Are you insane? Where are we supposed to go? I don't know, I said calmly, but seeing as you are so good at managing finances, I'm sure you'll figure it out. I pushed my chair back and stood up. I felt 10 feet tall. Now, I said, looking at the cheap cake with the neon frosting. I think I've lost my appetite for dessert. The silence in the kitchen was different now. It wasn't the silence of a trap. It was the silence of a bomb that had just gone off, and the dust was just starting to settle. For a solid 10 seconds, the only sound in the kitchen was the hum of the refrigerator. Lance stared at the purchase agreement lying on top of his fraudulent paperwork. His mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Then, the explosion happened. You did what? Lance screamed. His voice cracked. It wasn't the deep, confident voice of a businessman. It was the shrill, panicked shriek of a child who just dropped his ice cream cone in the dirt. I sold the house, I said, taking a calm sip of water. I believe I was clear. You can't. Lance slammed his fist on the table. The cheap wine bottle wobbled. You can't just sell this house. It's the family home. It's been in the family for 40 years. It has been in my name for 40 years. I corrected him. And today, I decided I didn't want it anymore. But what about us? Julia screeched. She was standing now, her hands gripping the back of her chair, so hard her knuckles were white. Eunice, we live here. We have our office here. You can't just pull the rug out from under us like this. I didn't pull the rug, Julia. I said, I sold the floor. Lance grabbed the purchase agreement. He scanned it frantically, his eyes darting back and forth, looking for a loophole, looking for a signature that wasn't there, looking for a mistake. This is dated today, he stammered. 3:15 p.m. You did this today. While you were at work, I said, right around the time I was finding those credit card bills you hid in the guest room desk. Lance froze. His head snapped up. Yeah, I said, my voice hardening. I saw them. The $40,000 in debt. The car payments you're missing. I know why you wanted me to sign that power of attorney, Lance. You didn't want to manage my money. You wanted to spend it. That's not true. Lance yelled, his face turning a blotchy red. We were trying to protect you. And this is how you repay us. By selling our inheritance to some stranger. There it was. The word that had been hanging in the air between us for years. Inheritance. I stood up slowly. I walked over to the counter and picked up the paper napkin I had used earlier. I wiped a crumb off the table. Your inheritance, I repeated quietly. I looked him dead in the eye. That is the problem, Lance. You have spent your entire adult life waiting for me to die, so you could start living. You looked at this house and didn't see a home. You saw a piggy bank you were waiting to smash open. It's our right. Lance argued, desperate now. I am your only son. That equity is supposed to be for the family. You just gave it away to some investor. I didn't give it away. I said, I sold it. For market value. Well, close enough to it. But where is the money? Julia demanded, stepping around the table. If you sold it today, where is the check? We can fix this. We can call the guy back, offer him more money to cancel the contract. The money is gone. I lied. Well, it was a half lie. It is in a trust account, a secure trust account that you have no access to, and the contract is binding. There is no cooling off period for cash investors. You are selfish, Julia spat. You are a selfish, senile old woman. I might be old, I said, but I am definitely not senile. And as for selfish, I think I have earned the right to be selfish. I spent 40 years being selfless. I paid for colleges I didn't attend. I paid for weddings that ended in divorce. I paid for businesses that failed. Today, I paid for my freedom. Lance looked like he was going to throw up. He sank into his chair, putting his head in his hands. You ruined us, he moaned into his palms. We have nowhere to go. We have no cash. We were counting on the equity loan to pay off the cards. I know, I said. That is why I sold it. Just then, the doorbell rang. It was a sharp, cheerful chime. Ding dong. Lance jumped like he had been shot. Who is that? I imagine that is the new management, I said, checking my watch. Right on time. I walked out of the kitchen, leaving them standing in the wreckage of their birthday ambush. I walked to the front door and opened it. Standing on the porch was a tall, broad-shouldered man, holding a clipboard. He was wearing a polo shirt with the logo of Russo's investment firm. Mrs. Triana? He asked. Yes, I said. You must be the property manager. That's me, Mike Evans, he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Mr. Russo sent me over to do the initial walkthrough and verify occupancy. Come right in, Mike, I said. The unauthorized tenants are in the kitchen. I led him down the hall. Lance and Julia were standing exactly where I left them, staring at the doorway with wide, terrified eyes. Who is this? Lance demanded, trying to muster some authority, but failing miserably. I'm Mike, the man said, looking around the kitchen and making a note on his clipboard. I represent the new owner. I'm just here to document the condition of the appliances and the fixtures. He looked at Lance, then at Julia. He looked at the half-eaten cake on the counter. You folks must be the guests Mrs. Triana mentioned, Mike said. Just so you know, we're scheduling renovations starting Monday. So we're going to need the premises vacated by Sunday night. Sunday? Julia shrieked. This is Wednesday. We can't move in 4 days. Mike shrugged. He didn't care. He wasn't their mother. He was a guy doing a job. The lease agreement Mrs. Triana signed gives her tenancy, Mike explained calmly. But the addendum states that no other adults are permitted to reside on the property without a separate background check and lease. And Mr. Russo isn't accepting new leases right now. So, Sunday. Lance looked at me. His eyes were wet. He looked like the little boy who used to scrape his knee and come running to me for a bandage. Mom, he whispered, please, you can't let them kick us out. Where will we go? We have no money for a deposit on a new place. I looked at him. A part of me, the old part, the mother part, wanted to reach for my checkbook. I wanted to fix it. I wanted to say, it's okay, I'll help you one last time. But then I looked at the table. I saw the power of attorney document. I saw the highlighter mark on the section about cognitive decline. He wasn't asking for help. He was asking for permission to keep using me. You have a BMW, Lance, I said softly. You can sell it. That should cover a deposit on an apartment. But I need that car for work, he cried. Then I guess you have a choice to make, I said. Adult choices are hard, aren't they? I walked over to the counter where my purse was sitting. I had packed a small suitcase earlier and left it by the front door, hidden behind the coat rack. I am leaving now, I announced. Leaving? Julia asked. Where are you going? To a hotel, I said. The Four Seasons, actually. I hear they have excellent room service and very comfortable beds. And the best part is, nobody there will ask me to sign legal documents before I eat my dessert. I picked up my purse. I looked at the kitchen one last time. It was a nice kitchen. I would miss the light in the morning, but I wouldn't miss the darkness that lived here now. Mike, I said to the property manager, please ensure the locks are changed on Monday. Will do, ma'am, Mike said, tapping his clipboard. I walked to the back door, the one that led to the garage. I stopped and turned back to Lance and Julia. They looked small. They looked defeated. They looked like two people who had gambled everything on the assumption that kindness was weakness, and they had lost. Happy birthday to me, I said. I opened the door and walked out. I got into my car. My suitcase was already in the trunk. I backed out of the driveway. Through the kitchen window, I could see Lance shouting something at Mike, waving his arms. I saw Julia sitting at the table, her face buried in her hands, crying. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel guilty. I felt lighter. I put the car in drive and headed toward the city lights. I had a reservation to keep, and for the first time in 3 years, the only name on the bill was mine. It has been exactly 6 months since I walked out of my kitchen and left my son standing in the wreckage of his own greed. I am writing this from the balcony of my new condo in Sarasota, Florida. The view is quite different here. Instead of looking out at a suburban street and a driveway cluttered with my son's leased luxury cars, I am looking at the Gulf of Mexico. The water is a brilliant, impossible turquoise. The air smells like salt and jasmine. I just finished a water aerobics class. At 70, I thought my knees were done for, but it turns out they just needed a warmer climate and a little less stress. Who knew that carrying the weight of a grown man's financial failures was so hard on the joints? My life is unrecognizable now, and I mean that in the best way possible. I live in a 55-plus active living community. It is like a college campus, but the dorms are luxury apartments, the cafeteria is a 5-star bistro, and nobody is worried about passing exams. We are just worried about making the 4 p.m. happy hour. I have made more friends in 6 months than I made in the last 10 years back home. Real friends. Friends who don't ask me for loans. Friends who want to know what I think about the latest book club selection, not where I keep my checkbook. And then there is Arthur. Arthur is 72. He is a retired structural engineer with a gentle smile and a full head of silver hair. We met at the community dog park. I bought myself a little French bulldog named Lucky. Arthur held the gate open for me, and we started talking. 2 nights ago, Arthur took me out to dinner. When the check came, I instinctively reached for my purse. That is a habit born from years of dining with Lance, where the check would sit on the table until the silence became awkward, and I would inevitably pay. Arthur gently put his hand over mine. "Eunice," he said, "put that away. I invited you." I almost cried right there over the creme brulee. It wasn't about the money. It was about the respect. It was about being with a man who sees me as a partner, not a resource. As for Lance and Julia, they tried to fight, of course. Greed doesn't give up easily. About a week after I left, while I was staying in that lovely hotel suite, my lawyer, Robert, called me. He was chuckling. Lance hired an attorney, Robert told me, a strip mall guy. They tried to file an injunction to stop the sale. They claimed you were mentally incompetent and that you were coerced into selling the house. My heart sped up for a second when I heard that. But Robert continued. I sent over the video recording of our meeting. "Eunice, remember? I record all real estate closings for liability. It showed you negotiating the price, demanding the leaseback clause, and clearly articulating your reasons. You were sharper than the investor." Robert told me that when Lance's lawyer saw the footage and the affidavit from the investor stating I was a tough negotiator, he dropped the case. He told Lance he didn't have a leg to stand on. The judge would have laughed them out of court. You can't declare someone incompetent just because they made a decision you don't like. I heard through a cousin that Lance and Julia had to move into a small 2-bedroom apartment on the other side of town. They had to sell the BMW. Julia had to actually get a job at a furniture store instead of just pretending to be a high-end designer. They are struggling. I know they are. And sometimes, late at night, the old guilt tries to creep in. The motherly instinct whispers, should you send them a little money? Just for groceries? But then I remember the highlighter. I remember the power of attorney document. I remember them sitting in my kitchen, eating cheap cake, waiting for me to sign away my autonomy, so they could put me in a home. They didn't want a mother. They wanted a victim. I refused to be a victim. I have learned a very hard, very valuable lesson in my 70th year. A mother's job is to raise a child. It is to teach them to walk, to speak, to be kind, and to stand on their own 2 feet. A mother's job is not to carry an adult. If you carry an adult, you aren't helping them. You are crippling them. And you are breaking your own back in the process. I put down my pen. Arthur is waving at me from the pool deck. He has 2 glasses in his hand. I stand up. My legs are strong. My mind is clear. My bank account is secure. I walk to the railing and wave back. I spent 40 years worrying about everyone else. I spent 40 years being silent. Now, the only sound I want to hear is the ocean, the laughter of my friends, and the ice clinking in my glass. I am not just surviving my golden years. I am finally living them. Did you like the story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story.